Born to a man and a mortal, or rather a god and a mortal, Hercules was just another child of Zeus's of his many children, who he actually had 92 children. So Zeus was actually raised by his mother, his mortal mother, Alcmena, and her husband, Amphitryon. Zeus is actually married to Hera, who is the goddess of woman, marriage, and childbirth, where Zeus is the god of sky and thunder. Because Zeus had relations with a mortal and therefore had his child Hercules, his birth is kind of seen as a sign to Hera that a sign and a reminder of unlawful marriage from Zeus, and just another reminder of Zeus's infidelity. So his birth kind of undermines her divine role, and throughout all of Hercules' life, Hera has this hatred and acts of malice towards him. But for his origin of his name, is also important because Hercules isn't the most appropriate name if we're talking about this within Greek mythology. Hercules is actually the Roman name, while Heracles is the Greek name. So when we're speaking of Greek mythology and we're referring to all the rest of these as Zeus and Hera and so on, is actually Heracles in this story. But because of like modern interpretations like Disney, where they use Hercules and all these actually just Hercules, and use Zeus, Hera, and all these other names, it's kind of misconstrued his name when referencing like the correct mythology. But for the sake of like ease and popularity, Hercules is what we come to know him as. As for Hera's malices towards Hercules, it actually started before his birth. So Zeus had swore that the next child born in the house of Perseus would become High King, and Hera actually delayed Alcmena's labor, who is Hercules' mortal mother, by forcing the goddess of childbirth to sit cross-legged while her clothing tied a knot, so as to prevent Alcmena from going to labor. And so while that was one of her first malices, that while delaying Hercules' birth, Hera actually caused his cousin Eurystheus to be born prematurely. So instead of Hercules becoming High King, it was Eurystheus, and therefore Hercules was then become his servant. And after his birth, while Hercules was 8 months old, Hera actually sent 2 giant snakes into his nursery to kill him. Though while that did not work, Hercules actually strangled both snakes with his bare hands, showing his immense strength. And so, of those just few hatreds and malices from Hera, you can see that she's not letting up, and she's actually later on inflicts madness onto Hercules, which she seeks out to destroy his happiness, and it was a fit of temporary insanity. And in the state, Hercules actually murdered his wife and children, his wife being Megra, like we see in the Hercules Disney movie. So that character, at least that idea we have of her and his children, and he believed them to be enemies. And as part of after doing that, he came out of his fit of madness, wondering what had happened to his children and what had happened to his wife. And as part of penance for his murders, he was then assigned the famous 12 labors that Hercules went through. And as part of these 12 labors, they were assigned to by King Eurystheus, so his cousin. And Hera actually influenced these tasks to be as difficult as possible, even impossible, and fatal. For the 12 labors that Hercules faced, the first one being to slay the Nemean lion, the second to slay the Lernaean hydra, the third to be capture the golden hen of Cyrenaia, and the fourth to capture the Ermanthian boar, and the fifth is to clean the stables of King Augeas. Sixth is to defeat the Stymphalian birds. The 7th is to capture the Cretan bull. 8 is to bring back the mirrors of Diomedes. 9 is to obtain the belt of Hippolyta. 10 is to obtain the cattle of Geryon. 11 is to bring the golden apples of Hesperides. And 12 was to capture Cerberus. Of these 12 labors, Eurystheus actually only counted 10 of them due to outside help, that he claimed that Hercules did not complete this all on his own, therefore it should not count. As part of Hercules' first labor, Eurystheus had ordered Hercules to kill the Nemean lion and bring back its skin. But the lion is known to be, at least unknown to Hercules, but known to us, is a massive, monstrous creature and was considered the offspring of Typhon, where his golden fur could not be pierced by arrows, or really any weapons in general. So as Hercules is coming to kill the lion, he realized he shot an arrow at it, it did not pierce its skin. And as he kept attacking it, he realized it was not working. So he actually entered into a two-mouse cave, the lion did, and as Hercules followed it, he decided to block off one of the entrances, so that he can then engage it in close combat, where he is physically strangling it with his sheer strength. And Hercules actually returned victorious and was actually wearing the lion's skin as a cloak, and the head as a helmet. And when he went to go present to Eurystheus his success, Eurystheus was actually so afraid of him that he hid in a bronze jar and forbade Hercules from entering his city. So he requested that Hercules actually just display his results of his labors and present the skin outside of the city. As part of Hercules' second labor, he was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, which is essentially a large serpent with about 9 heads. 8 were mortal, and the middle one was immortal. But as Hercules was beginning to try slaying this Hydra, the snake, he was cutting off all his mortal heads, but as he cut them off, 2 regenerated in their place of each. So it's doubling each time he cuts off a head. And so as he realized it was not working to just cut off these heads, he actually asked his nephew Iolaus for help, and he actually Iolaus used a flaming torch to basically cauterize the stumps to prevent them from regrowing, and that is actually part of the reason why the second labor is not considered one of his labors. But Hercules ultimately buries the single immortal head and dips his arrow in a poison to make them deadly, and shoots an arrow into the single immortal head and essentially kills it. And since King Eurystheus just declared the task invalid because Iolaus helped, it did not count towards his labors. So technically he has 10 labors because 2 of them did not count, but it is known as his 12 labors because these are still the labors that Hercules did, even though it is not considered the labors that were valid. Hercules' third labor was to capture the golden hen of Cyrenia. The golden hen was essentially a female deer and was very large and known for being fast enough to outrun its arrows shot after it. And this deer was actually very sacred to the goddess Artemis, and so he knew that Artemis would be very hurt and angry if Hercules was to kill it, and he actually spent about a year trying to track it and capture it before he was able to, while it was sleeping. And on his way back from capturing it, he actually met Artemis on the way back, and she was furious to know why he had the hen. And as part of explaining why he had to do it to complete his labor, she promised that he would be allowed to capture it and take it back and show Eurystheus that he had finished his labor. as long as he promised to return it unharmed. So as part of this, it was not as necessarily difficult in terms of physical labor within it, but it was a very time-consuming labor, and it actually ended up in a pretty nice deal between Hercules and Artemis, where it did not end in harsh difficulty like killing the Hydra took. For Hercules' fourth labor, he was to capture the Erymanthean boar. The actual goal was to capture it live, which proved a similar difficult task, but different to the one of the Hind, as this is a ferocious beast who is terrorizing the Erymanthean mountains. And as part of Hercules' method to capture it, he actually chased it into the deep snow so long enough that it could exhaust it, and he was able to trap it, which you would think would be very difficult, but as part of his method to exhaust it, it had put out enough of its fight, rather than compared to capturing the Hind, where it caught the Hind off guard by sleeping. And so when Hercules trapped the bear, he carried it back to Eurystheus, and who again was hiding just in a giant bronze jar out of fear, and presented his fourth labor, which did count, unlike the second labor. For Hercules' fifth labor, which Eurystheus did not count, Hercules was actually tasked by Eurystheus to clean the massive stables of Agia, which had not been cleaned in 30 years. It held thousands of cattle, and you can imagine the disgustingness of those stables. And he was actually tasked to do this in a single day. That's not going to work with the sheer amount of force and any kind of power that Hercules has physically. But in this case, he used his wits to actually divert nearby rivers to do this. As part of when he first came to King Augeas, he talked to him and was saying that he would pay him 10% of his cattle for his work. And although Augeas was not the most inclined to do this, he agreed and promised that he would do that. And so after he had diverted the rivers to clean the stables, which had cleaned them in with only hours compared to the 24 hours he was given, so he was on time for that. Eurystheus was the one who had assigned this to Hercules, and when Augeas had found out that this was the job assigned by Eurystheus, he broke his promise. He did not agree to pay him anymore, and Hercules had later on waged war against Augeas. And so as Eurystheus found out about how his labor is completed, not by the diverting of rivers, which that was a matter of wits, Hercules had decided to accept payment for it, which he believed was not fair and should make only 10 of the 12 labors official. For Hercules' sixth labor, he was to defeat the Stymphalian birds. This meant to basically drive them away from the lake in Arcadia that they surrounded within the deep woods. Hercules has found it difficult to get these birds to go away. He could not think logically of how to get them to go away. So upon his confusion, Athena actually gave him bronze rattles, in a sense, crafted by Hephaestus. And for these, he actually, Hercules rattled these to scare away the birds, and as the birds were flying away, he shot them down, and he brought some back as proof that he got these birds to fly away. For Hercules' seventh labor, he was to actually capture the Cretan bull, and the reason why the Cretan bull existed was because the king Minos of Crete failed to sacrifice a beautiful bull sent by Poseidon to Zeus, and instead he kept it for himself. And as punishment, Poseidon actually drove the bull mad and caused it to ultimately terrorize the island. And so Eurystheus ordered Hercules to capture this dangerous bull, and so it kind of required strength but also restraint because he was not to slaughter it, he was to capture it. So upon arriving in Crete, he got permission from the king Minos to take the beast to prove that he captured it, and he actually wrestled it into submission and rode it across the sea, all the way to deliver the bull to Eurystheus. And afterwards, the king was actually terrified of the beast, rightfully so, since it was drove mad by Poseidon, and he later released it after hiding and allowed it to wander. For Hercules' eighth labor, he was to bring back the mares of Diomedes. So the mares of Diomedes are actually known as being 4 man-eating mares of Diomedes who were owned by the king of Thrace. And as a brutal ruler, Diomedes often fed his guests and travelers to these horses, and they had this unnatural hunger for human flesh, and they were actually chained with iron to brass stalls. So he was not a kind owner to these horses necessarily, but as Hercules went to Thrace, he defeated the guards guarding it and fought Diomedes, and upon defeating Diomedes, he actually fed Diomedes to his horses, which in return actually caused these horses to calm down significantly, and there he was able to deliver the horses to Eurystheus, and they were eventually actually dedicated to Hera and then later set free. So it's kind of seen as like a victory over savagery and like being responsible for your own actions. These kind of actions of the king of Thrace, and eventually Diomedes was ultimately destroyed by his own cruelty against his guests and ultimately the horses, because that was not the most fair way to treat his horses. As part of Hercules' 9th labor he had to complete, he was to bring back the belt of Hippolyta. And so bringing back the belt of Hippolyta, which is the queen of the Amazons, the gift was meant for Eurystheus' daughter, and actually Hippolyta had initially agreed to give Hercules the belt willingly because she admired him, but Hera actually intervened, another act of malice, and caused Amazons to attack. Hera was disguised as an Amazon and sparked rumors that Hercules was intended to kidnap the queen, and this conflict kind of and rumor caused the Amazons to attack the ship and led to a fierce battle where Hercules actually ended up killing the Amazon warriors and their queen. Eventually Hercules successfully secured the belt and managed to escape, but this victory was not without killing and bloodshed caused by Hera's deception of what Hercules' intention was. So that is often the most popular tale. There are different ones that have less conflict and less bloodshed, but as part of the most popular one, it required a lot of bloodshed to get what was originally a simple gesture between Hippolyta and Hercules. For Hercules' 10th labor, he had to obtain the cattle of Geryon, and Hercules was to travel to the far western island of Erythea and ultimately steal the cattle belonging to the 3-bodied giant Geryon. So Geryon was composed of 3 bodies. He had 3 heads and 6 arms, and Hercules traveled in a giant golden cup, which was basically a boat, loaned by the sun god Helios, and he had to kill the herdsman, Ereuton, and the 2-headed hound, Orthus, before even battling Geryon. So Hera actually sent gadflies to scour the herd, and thieves tried to steal them during the return journey. But despite these challenges, Hercules was actually able to return the cattle to Eurystheus, who sacrificed them to Hera. And originally this was actually the last of the 10 labors, so it's originally meant to be 10 labors assigned to Hercules, but because of the 2nd and the 5th one being invalid tasks, it led to Hercules having 2 more tasks for him to get the total 10 labors that he needed. So ultimately 12 labors were not needed, but 10 were the only ones that counted. Hercules' 11th labor was to steal the mortal golden apples of Hesperides, which would be a wedding gift to Hera, which were guarded by nymphs and a dragon. The dragon having 100 heads. And the location was actually unknown, and the apples were divine property. So while searching, Hercules had to kill the eagle, tormenting Prometheus, who then told him to get the Titan Atlas to steal the apples. So Hercules agreed to hold the heavens for Atlas, where the Titan actually retrieved the apples, and when Atlas returned, he wanted to actually return the apples himself and leave Hercules with the weight. But at first Hercules agreed and but asked Atlas to take the weight for a moment so that he could pat his shoulders for holding the weight, essentially. But as part of his trickery, which one could argue is not the heroic behavior that should be illustrated by Hercules, he just left with apples. He ultimately just tricked Atlas and still completed his labor. For the last labor that Hercules had to complete was he had to capture Cerberus. Cerberus was a multi-headed hound of Hades, and which Hades is the god of the underworld, essentially. And so in the underworld, he had to subdue the beast without using any weapons, as Hades agreed to. And so he had to rely solely on his strength, but he also had his lion skin cloak from his previous labor that he could use for protection. And after entering the underworld, he ultimately literally just hand wrestled this beast into submission, and upon that, he presented the dog to King Eurystheus and offered to release Hercules from all of his burdens, and then the dog was returned to the underworld. And so the last task, which is meant to be impossible, represented his ultimate victory over death and helped to solidify Hercules' status as the greatest hero. And therefore he completed the 12 labors while only having 10 actually count, but ultimately to redeem his penance for his earlier madness caused by Hera. For one of the first works on here is the Library of Apollodorus. It is a comprehensive reference that scholars use for Greek mythology, and is arguably one of the most important references because of how detailed it is, and it has chronological order and genealogical order, so it makes it really easy for scholars to find connections between different characters in there. It also details Heracles' origin and his 12 labors, along with other characters within there, but Heracles actually has his own sections in there. And so for one of the quotes that might be interesting would be, as the second labor, he ordered him to kill the Lernaean Hydra. That creature bred in the swamp of Lerna used to go forth into the plain and ravage both the cattle and the country. Now the Hydra had a huge body with 9 heads, 8 mortal, but the middle one immortal. So this actually shows the role of monsters in Hercules' labors. This was his second labor, where he was off to defeat yet again another monster. And like most of his labors, he had been assigned by Eurystheus to deal with any such monstrous creature that not only required just sheer strength, but also wits to handle them. And another quote that would resemble redemption is, as part of the labors, the quote was, "And she told him to dwell in Tiryns, serving Eurystheus for 12 years and perform the 10 labors imposed on him. And so she said, when the tasks were accomplished, he would be immortal." So Hercules was advised by the Oracle of Delphi to be able to atone for his wrongdoings of killing his wife and children in a fit of rage caused by Hera by serving Eurystheus to complete his labors as what would be his atonement, and something that he'd be able to forgive himself for, or at least have others forgive him for. For Euripides' Heracles, it's actually very interesting in the way that it goes about this, because it kind of subverts the expectation that Hercules completes his 12 labors after his fit of rage and madness caused by Hera, by actually flipping the ordering of that. He actually, at the end of his 12th labor, and as he's coming back home, it was then after his labors that Hera had sent this madness onto Hercules, causing him to kill his wife and children. And so it's more about the psychological part of that and how he's meant to endure the kind of trauma he brings upon himself after that, and kind of like also reflects on like the cruelty of gods and how they're not always just these good beings. They have messy and cruel ways to deal with things, and so it kind of reverses what we have known and like subverts the idea that we have in mythology to show more of the psychological section of it. And so it kind of goes to redefine heroism as perseverance through suffering and shame, so that it's not necessarily just these heroic acts he does, it's kind of these his perseverance to handle these things that are not pleasant things to go through, but they're not physical things he can just get over with. So for one of the themes that we have is enchantments. So it says, "Come then, maiden wed, child of murky night, harden my heart relentlessly, send forth frenzy upon him, confound his mind even to the slaying of his children, drive him mad, goad him wildly on his mad career, shake out the sails of death." So this part kind of personifies Madness as a character. So Madness is actually a character within this work, and instead of Madness being just something that Hera sends on Hercules as just something of her own power, it is just kind of like a servant of hers. She is sending out Madness, who is a character, to take out this madness onto her. So Madness as a condition inflicted on by Madness, the character. And while in the story, the work, that it actually accounts that Madness does not necessarily want to do this. It's not of her own will, it is by Hera's will. And so that is how enchantments are used in that part. We also have the power of friendship and or hope versus despair, where Theseus actually acts as a friend, actually acts as a true friend, where he is encouraging and trying to liven up the loss that Hercules is facing after murdering his wife and children, and after coming out of that fit of rage, the despair he's feeling. So the quote goes like this: Heracles says, "Therefore am I resolved on death." Theseus says, "Dost thou suppose the gods attend to these thy threats?" Heracles, "Remorseless hath heaven been to me, so I will prove the like to it." Theseus, "Hush, lest thy presumption add to thy sufferings." So it's kind of trying to encourage him and talk some sense into him that, like, even though he has done all these horrible things, that he does not need to add to his suffering. He does not need to keep on continuing the pain that he's still enduring. He's trying to be a good friend. For the third major work, we have The Women of Trachis. It actually focuses mainly on Deianira's accidental murder of Heracles, which is her husband. This is after Megra, so it's not Hercules' first wife. It actually explores the neglect she feels within their marriage, and how she's trying to get him to bring back that love that she once thought she had, through a love potion that goes wrong, and kind of goes to highlight like this perspective of women in ancient Greece, and show maybe like the neglect they feel within their marriages and how they are within that in society. So for the first theme is longing and nostalgia. Children are born to us, whom he has seen only as the husbandman seen his distant field, at seed time and once again at harvest. So this is Deianira kind of being nostalgic of her joyous idea of marriage that she imagined with Hercules in the beginning, and how it seemed like something that she really wanted, something that was really peaceful and good for her. But it's really just been like a lifetime of loneliness in this marriage. It seems like he only ever is with her very, very infrequently each year, and just goes there ultimately to have more kids, it seems. And kind of just it's just bringing loneliness to her life. For the second theme, we have enchantment, and this is the part where she uses a love potion to on Hercules to get him to ultimately love her more, or love like he used to do. And so the quote goes, "This shall to be thee a charm for the soul of Heracles, that he shall never look upon any woman to love her more than thee." So these are the words that Nessus, the centaur that Hercules actually kills with poison arrows, says to Deianira. But unfortunately his blood is now tainted with poison from those poison arrows that Hercules shot him at, and so the love potion kind of goes on not as planned, and ultimately ends up being Hercules' demise, even though that was not the intent of Deianira's love potion. It was not how she wanted to get out of this loveless marriage. It was she meant to get a marriage that's full of love again, not just simply get rid of a loveless marriage by killing him. The fourth major work I have is Hesiod's Shield of Heracles. So this is actually a really good example of the technique of ekphrasis, which is ultimately a vivid and detailed description of scenes and imagery. So it's actually the description of the scenes on Heracles' shield. It tells the battle between Hercules and Cycnus. So for one of the themes that I noticed in this was divine intervention. This divine intervention was where Athena helped Hercules in his battle with Cycnus and allowed him to not only protect himself by Athena deflecting a spear aimed towards Hercules, but also allowing him to find the means to stab Cycnus in the thigh that eventually allowed him to defeat him in general of the battle. So for the quote, "But from her chariot Athena, gleaming-eyed, deflected his spear's force. Then bitter woe seized Ares, who then leapt upon his foe, his keen sword drawn, the son of Amphitryon, still keen for battle, as Ares came on, forcefully stabbed his thigh." So again, like I've said, it's kind of this divine intervention that these gods aren't working alone. There's always someone out there helping them, and it's, in this case, it is Athena. I also thought of another theme that seemed appropriate for this is the fear in war. And while war is often thought of something that has a lot of strength and aggression and passion for different ideas or even property, different cases like that fear still plays a role in that, even though it coexists along with aggression. So for this, I have, "He stood upon his chariot, while beside him flight and panic hovered, eager for the fight." So it's showing flight and panic as part of characters in this fight, not just, it's personifying it, not just saying that he's afraid or that these characters are afraid. These are personifications of it. For the last major work that Hercules appears in, that I've found, is Disney's Hercules movie. So this movie is actually significant for introducing Hercules to basically mainstream world of just the general population. It has a lot of misconceptions it's formed, at least within the naming. So Hercules refers to Roman mythology, but it's telling the story of Greek mythology. So that's the main misconception. And as I'm now using Hercules to describe the Greek mythology of Heracles. But it's also really helped to hone in on the hero's journey. That's the main focus of the movie. It's not necessarily with the tragedies faced by this. It doesn't mention anything about the madness and fit of rage he went into. It goes through his journey of trying to enjoying the gods. So for one of the themes that is here is the power of temptation. For this is more of the scene when Hades is trying to use Megara and convince another deal with her. So the quote goes, "I get a feeling you're gonna leap at my new offer. You give me the key to bring down Wonder Breath, and I give you the thing that you crave most in the entire world, in the entire cosmos, your freedom." So Hades actually uses the power of temptation to convince Megara to help his plan to destroy Hercules, and what she craves most is her freedom. She is bounded by her deal with Hades, as ultimately her servant, and she is not able to escape this, but he's offering something that she truly craves. For another theme that I noticed was heroic action / rescue. So in this, we have Zeus saying, "Fine work, my boy, you've done it, you're a true hero," and Hera saying, "You were willing to give your life to rescue this young woman." This was after Hercules had dived into the river Styx of the underworld to return Meg's soul to her body. So he was sacrificing his own mortality to save her, because this was when he had technically still had his mortality, and he dove into this river full of many souls. It's draining the life out of him visibly, but as he was bring her soul to return to her body, he also gained back the color he had, also illustrating that he had came back his strength that was drawn out of him in his original deal with Hades. And also goes that partially goes to show the absence of color and the presence of color in that, because when he made that original deal with Hades, he had this like color and life drawn out of him, but gaining that back after performing that heroic action of saving Meg's life helped to show that also. I also thought of two other themes that don't have quotes with them, but are also just key roles of parts in the movie. Is the role of music. Music is very important in the storytelling of this movie, as with much other Disney movies, and it actually relies on gospel, which is rooted in storytelling, and the gospel's music within it is performed by the muses, and goes to tell the stories as he's going through the different scenes and situations in the movie. And we also have the instances of joy and sorrow mixed and appearing at the same time. A key scene that this is illustrated in is the ending scene when Hercules can join the gods, as he's proved himself to be able to join them. But being with Megra, he would have to abandon his life with her and his love for her, since she is immortal. But so it's kind of that mixed feeling of he's finally able to join the gods, but he would have to leave Meg behind. But in the end, he doesn't join the gods. He leaves behind as immortal, and so it's always that joy and sorrow mixed together, where he wasn't able to join the gods. He'd have to be immortal if he wanted this, or he'd become immortal and have to leave Meg behind.